Welcome to this, the seventh in our series of Totally Teal podcasts, our conversations about teal or next stage organisational thinking. During our last podcast, we explored the principal themes found in next stage organisations. We now need to consider the principles of distributed leadership, the engine room of self-management, and at the heart of successful next stage development. Giles kicks off this conversation.
Self-management is really the engine room of what enables these next stage organisations to truly come alive. It's what enables these responsive processes of human relating, or what Chris said earlier around locally appropriate responsive decisions, really to enable our systems to adapt and evolve. And it's perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of the shift to next stage, because it involves us transmuting our power and control dynamics, changing our meeting conventions and changing our decision-making protocols, changing the very organisational structure that we've become so caught up in, the top-down hierarchy and the search for control and clarity and management, which is such a defining characteristic of yesterday's logic, because it's woven deep within our Western mindset and our organisational psyche. So how do we move beyond that? How do we move into self-management?
So from our experience in working in this area, we believe that there are four absolutely fundamental areas that need to be addressed. And what we're going to do is take each of those in turn. So the first one is around role clarification and decision making. This is right at the heart of being an effective next stage organisation and right at the heart of adopting self-management. The effectiveness of the system relies on a very high degree of clarity around roles and very well understood shared processes for making decisions. And one of the first things you would have to do in leading your organisation towards a self-management paradigm is to engage your organisation in the process of role clarification and the adoption of a standardised decision-making process. The second of these areas is what we call a governance process, the adoption of a governance process. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, one of the key features of this new way of working is, as we have said in previous podcasts, the system itself is like a living system. It continually needs to evolve and adapt to the changing environmental pressures. So in other words, the very structure itself will need to be adaptive. One of the features that marks it out from the fixed, inflexible hierarchy of our traditional systems. And a governance process allows for the continual updating and evolution of the structure. So gone are the wholesale, not to mention the incredibly painful and costly structural reorganisations. The third area is all to do with equipping your workforce to deal with conflict. So in other words, this is about having in place a conflict resolution process. Now that people have real power and are all decision makers, and people being people, there will inevitably be conflict and at all levels. And as there are no longer bosses in your organisation to, quote, deal with it, unquote, you're going to have to equip your people with the skills to artfully negotiate tricky problems effectively. And we have found in our experience that training for these integral skills is incredibly valuable to people, particularly when you combine it with our final recommendation, and that is about equipping people with coaching skills. So that's our fourth area. So in a similar vein, having greater responsibility and autonomy, the very peer-to-peer nature of all the processes embraced by a next stage organisation, which include, by the way, appraisal, recruitment, conflict resolution, well, they all require people to have high levels of personal self-confidence and the ability to be much more effective in influencing and in their relationships. And we find that coaching skills are perfectly suited to the kind of nature of the culture that teal organisations are trying to foster. And so we have this fourth and final essential component. All of these you will need to consider on your next step towards your own organisational teal journey. However, while we have majored on the essential elements, it would be absolutely remiss of us not to touch on some of the other peripheral, what we call apps. Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Sure, thanks. And having just heard about these core elements that absolutely need to be in place to create, if you like, a framework, what is very common in organizations is that initiatives get started, and then you look at the underlying systems behind the scenes that actually operate in a manner that could undermine the intent of the new strategy. And so it is looking at separate apps within the business. And by considering things such as recognition and reward, appraisals, how people manage their own financial costings, the way that those have historically been managed in hierarchical command and control organizational structures has resulted in effectively a sign-off or approval type process. The difference here is that organizations need to think about how they structure these particular separate apps such that they are empowering the local teams to make their local decisions. And that includes transparent information access, as I say, reward and recognition teams that actually recognize the team, recognize the whole collective contribution to the overall purpose of the organization and the purpose of that individual business unit. By morphing, if you like, the support systems and the mechanisms behind the scenes, you seek to align the whole organization towards this philosophy, as opposed to putting the accelerator down with one foot and the brake with the other.
I love that. I love that. Accelerator down, 1 foot brake with the other. It often happens in some of the organisations I see trying to transform towards teal. So it really is about that holistic change and those core areas, but also these peripheral apps. So lovely. Next week, we're going to hear about how we can go deeper to equip ourselves and our organisations on this journey towards becoming totally teal.
So thanks to everyone for a really comprehensive look at these key areas and tools that are required for effective self-management to operate. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, examining some of those principal skill sets, and if you would like to explore more of our Totally Teal conversations, then as ever, please do subscribe by clicking the button on our Totally Teal channel on Podbean. In the meantime, I look forward to meeting you at our next Totally Teal podcast conversation. Bye for now.